Hello, PDA supporters. I'm Bill Bianchi with Progressive Democrats of America in Chicago. And we're here with another in our series of Progressive Voices from the City. And we're focusing now on the municipal elections that'll take place in Chicago in February of 2015. We're doing that by talking with progressive candidates who, for the first time in many years, are mounting a serious challenge to the power elite that rules our city. So today I'm talking with Carlos Rosa, who's running for alderman in the 35th Ward, and he's challenging the incumbent, Ray Colon. Welcome, Carlos, and thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the politics, why don't you take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you think we should know about you?
So my name is Carlos Ramirez Rosa. I'm a candidate for alderman here in the 35th Ward. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, and I'm running for alderman because I love this city, and I'm tired of the direction that we're going in. I work currently as a community organizer, helping immigrant families that are facing deportation. And previously, I worked as a congressional caseworker in the office of Congressman Luis Gutierrez, helping people cut through government red tape. So I know what it is to provide good constituent services. And I'm a lifelong progressive. So I've been going to rallies since I was 13 years old against the Iraq War.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, so you've got a background. What can you tell us about the 35th Ward? You're probably not too familiar with it, where is it to begin with, and who lives there, and what do you think the problems are?
Yeah, so the 35th Ward encompasses 5 neighborhoods: Hermosa, Logan Square, Albany Park, Avondale, and Irving Park. And it is very gerrymandered. In some places, it's only 6 blocks wide. Wow. So what I tell folks is it's shaped like this, like an L. And so you have parts of Hermosa right here at the bottom of the L. And then right at where the 2 parts of the L meet is where Logan Square is. And then emanating north along Kimball up through Lawrence, you take in Avondale, Irving Park, and Albany Park. Okay. 55,000 residents, and about over 2/3 of them are Latinos. Working class, really? Medium income is about $50,000.
Okay. So far, how far west does that go?
It goes as far west as Pulaski at certain points.
Pulaski. And on the east?
On the east, it goes as far east as Kedzie.
Now, people probably may not be too familiar with Ray Colon. What's his record?
So I'm running against Ray Colon in the 35th Ward. He was elected in 2003, and he ran as a progressive. He talked a really strong game. And since then, what we've seen is that he's really made the term progressive meaningless. He stood by with developers while they've evicted families from their homes. He stood against the community when he made certain decisions that benefited the richer folks in our city. And he's voted with the mayor overwhelmingly on some major things, such as getting pet coke out of the city of Chicago. So he's a guy that kind of masquerades and says, I'm for the people, I'm by the people, when in reality he sides with the interests of the elites in the city time and time again.
Okay. We need to come back to that point because I think that's crucial going forward. So let's turn to your campaign. Now, you're running for a seat in the Chicago City Council, which is not very friendly to progressives. So what do you hope to accomplish there?
Absolutely. So, the alderman is in a unique position because they're both a legislator, but in many ways they're also the decision maker in their ward. They're kind of a chief executive when it comes to issues of zoning and development and dispersing 1.3 million. So on the ward level, what I want to do is turn over zoning and development decisions to ward residents. And not just in this, give me your input, but actually saying people affected by this development will have the final say in terms of what's built there. Wow. And at the same time, participatory budgeting, so making sure that the $1.3 million that an alderman disperses are in the hands of constituents. And so they get to have a final say and say, this is how we want to spend this money, as opposed to the status quo where the alderman kind of looks at which blocks voted for him, and then they get the new lights and the new street paving.
And that's that money, that discretionary money that every alderman gets, 1.3 million, you say, and they can decide to do with it what they want to do with it.
Exactly.
Okay, and most aldermen just make the decision themselves. Right. Whereas you're saying, I'm going to let the people really have the final say.
Exactly. Okay. So I'm going to be an organizing alderman, knocking doors, speaking with my neighbors, and engaging them in conversations about what they want to see happen in City Hall, so that I can then take that and speak boldly in City Hall and say, this is what my community needs, this is what we want, and let's put the interests of our neighborhoods first. So I'm going to stand up to corporate handouts, I'm going to fight to close corporate tax loopholes, and I'm going to say this is a city of working people, and the public policy needs to reflect that.
Okay. Now, what skills or experience do you think you're bringing to the council that are lacking there now?
Yeah, so I'm a community organizer. I'm a congressional caseworker. I'm a person that knows how to help people navigate government, both from the inside and the outside. So when it comes to constituent services, which are lacking in the 35th Ward, I'm going to bring knowledge of what it is to run a good constituent service operation. And when it comes to building power and organizing people to understand their interests and to fight for that interest, I'm going to bring that as well. So I think oftentimes aldermen are fighting the good fight in city council, but they don't bring the people with them. And so I think it's going to be critical that if I'm going to be an independent alderman that's going to stand up to the status quo, that's going to stand up to a Mayor Rahm or a mayor of the 1%, that we're going to have someone that's going to say, look, it's not just me, a lone wolf. I have my community backing me up. And so as an organizing alderman, I'm going to bring that experience of, understanding people's interests and getting them to fight.
Okay. Let's turn to issues now. What are the key issues in this race in your ward that you're going to campaign on?
So I've been knocking the doors since day one, since the first day that I could collect signatures. And what people are telling me down the line is they're fed up with the corporate handouts. They're tired with TIF money being used as slush funds. But they're also tired of seeing how the city prioritizing corporate handouts above city services is affecting their ward. So they're tired of the potholes. They're tired of the rats taking over the alley and no one coming in and laying traps or poison. They're tired of a city that is unresponsive to their concerns and really gives them bad service, not cutting down trees that are a risk to children and neighbors in the neighborhood. So people are seeing how their neighborhoods and their schools and their institutions are being starved of resources. And they're also seeing at the same time how the resources, the billions of dollars in City Hall, are being redirected towards building condos downtown or building stadiums.
Yeah. Let's talk about education a little bit. Were any schools closed in the 35th Ward that you know of?
So no schools were closed in the 35th Ward, but that doesn't mean that we're not affected by that in our community. When you shut down a school, you're affecting an entire community and you're affecting a city. And so folks are upset about school closures in the 35th Ward, and I hear it all the time.
So what is your vision for public education in Chicago?
Thank you for asking that. So education is a issue that's near and dear to my heart. I graduated from the Chicago Public Schools, and I'm very proud of that fact. And so
you might be the only one in the council who did. Certainly nobody on the school board.
Exactly. So I support an elected school board, and I also support making sure that teachers, parents, and students have the resources that they need to thrive. So to that effect, I believe that we need to make sure that every single property tax dollar that we can goes to our public schools. And at the same time that we're also making sure that we're finding other revenues to fully fund our schools. So I believe that teachers, right, educators, the ones with the expertise, should be empowered to make the decision in the classroom around curriculum, not bureaucrats and businessmen in City Hall.
Now, charter schools have been a contentious issue, but I'm not sure that people really understand why exactly, at least those people who are not directly involved in the struggle. So what would you like voters to know about charter schools?
I'd like voters to know that charter schools on average underperform public schools, and that the folks that are pushing charter schools in reality are looking for ways to bust teachers' unions so that they can pay hard workers less, and are also looking for a way that they can make a buck off of our public schools. And so when you look at the way that charter schools are structured, it's all about privatizing public education. And I would ask voters to think long and hard, right? Do they believe that we are best served when education, instead of being educating children as the focus, instead has the focus of creating profits for a corporation?
Are there charter schools in the ward?
There are some charter schools in the ward, and there's some more proposed. And so what we're looking to do is to make sure that when we are proposing new schools, that those are public schools.
Would you call for, what would you say to the parents? Are you going to call for a moratorium or a closing of charter schools? Or?
So I agree with Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, who says that charter schools, when they're used as they were intended to be used, right, which was as experimental places where we can develop good policy and then transfer that over to the entire system, work well. But charter schools as they're currently used, which is, busting teachers' unions, privatizing public education, that isn't how charter should be used.
On public safety, now, we've all seen and heard the painful stories about violence in Chicago. What do you think this administration is doing right or wrong in terms of public safety?
So when I think of public safety issues, I think of root causes of crime, and I think of unemployment. I think of youth being robbed of opportunities to thrive. And so what I would say to this current administration is, as opposed to, criminalizing more people and locking more folks up, let's attack the issue at its root cause, and let's focus on creating opportunity for Chicago's youth. But beyond that as well, I think we also need to treat our workers that work on issues of public safety, our police officers, with dignity and respect. And so, if you don't want to demoralize them, don't talk about taking away their pension, and at the same time make sure that we're properly funding and training the folks that are on our streets.
Let's talk about budget and finance and all that important stuff. Chicago's a rich city, and as far as I can tell, it's getting richer. Yet the city government is going broke, or always seems to be on the verge of being broke. So why is this, and how can aldermen fix that?
So there's billions of dollars in City Hall. And number one, we need to make sure that we're directing our resources where they need to go. So we need to reform the tax increment financing system to make sure that we're not using them as a corporate slush fund to give handouts to rich folks. And we also need to make sure that we're creating new revenue sources. So one of that ways would be closing corporate tax loopholes. And one of the ways that we can do that was actually proposed by the Chicago Teachers Union, which would be the LaSalle Street tax. And so taking the folks that are trading and making lots of money on LaSalle Street and the financial institutions there and saying, all right, you're going to have to pay a tax whenever you're gambling with this money, essentially.
Kind of a sales tax.
Yeah.
Like the rest of us pay. Now, what about we've heard talk about a tax on, I don't know why it's called a commuter tax, or people who work in the city but live in the suburbs. Have you considered that, or?
I know some folks running for mayor have proposed a head tax, a commuter tax. And it's definitely something that's interesting. It's something that I would be open to. But I think right now I'm more so focused on closing corporate tax loopholes. But certainly it's something that I'd be open to.
Okay, and the TIFs, would you end the TIF program, the tax increment financing, which comes out of the property tax?
I think TIFs, tax increment financing, when used properly, can have benefit in the community. There are some communities that are blighted, but for example, let's take LaSalle Street. Why does LaSalle Street have a TIF? LaSalle Street isn't blighted.
Really?
Yeah, it's not blighted.
Surprised to hear that.
Yeah, so well, it depends what type of blighted you mean. But there's no boarded up storefronts on LaSalle Street. There's no cracked facades of buildings, and so they don't need money, right, to invest there, right? People are going to invest there regardless of city subsidies, and so we definitely need to reform the system and make sure that there's more oversight and that we have fewer TIFs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and according to Tom Tresser, who studies these things, we've seen that there's over $1 billion sitting in accounts, TIF accounts, for various wards that are currently not being used. So now then we have the pensions. I mean, it seems like a really intractable dilemma almost. You've got this tremendous bill coming and you don't really have any way to pay it. And so, what can the aldermen do about this?
So, in many ways, the city of Chicago has failed to keep its end of the promise. Mm-hmm. A pension is a promise, right? Workers pay into it, the employer pays into it, and then when you retire, you know that because of the years of service that you've given, you're going to get that pension. My father's a pensioner. He receives a city pension, and he retired some years ago. But when we're looking at workers that are retiring 10, 20 years from now, the question is, will they get their full pension? And I believe that because they've been holding up their end of the bargain, right? They've been paying into it. Just because the city failed to pay into it doesn't mean that they should now be robbed of that pension. So, Springfield really needs to deal with the issue, but they're talking about kicking it back to the city council. If that happens, I'm going to be an advocate for workers and say, look, pension is a promise. We got to make sure that we find the revenue to plug the funding gap that the city council created, right? By robbing the pension fund and by robbing the funds that should have gone towards funding those pensions.
Right. The final thing is jobs. What can you do in your ward to increase employment, particularly at the lower end of the scale? And what do you think the city council can do in general to increase employment in the city?
So I think that we need to work with our small businesses. We need to work with employers that are within the ward and say, how can we help you find the resources to grow your business, right? How can we go and find sources of capital or revenue for you so that you can bring on more people to hire? But I also think it's looking at ways that we can make sure that whenever we are giving out money to a private corporation, or we're contracting out services that the city should be doing, let's make sure that those are good jobs that are going to Chicagoans. And so, you know, the mayor's giving out and the city council's giving out millions of dollars to attract employers to the city. Well, let's make sure that that's going to the folks that are giving the corporation that money, right? Which is the working people of the city of Chicago.
Some people have talked about a higher minimum wage as being a jobs producer. What are your thoughts about that?
You know, a rising tide raises all ships, right? Isn't that, I get that saying, right? Yeah. And that's my view on a minimum wage, right? If the minimum wage had kept up with inflation, and if it had kept up with productivity, it'd be much higher than what it is today. So raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is well overdue. And we also need to make sure that, you know, folks are able to pay for their food, that they're able to pay their electric bill, that they're able to pay for rent. And the reality is, if you're making minimum wage in the city of Chicago, you're not able to do those things. And so raising the $15 minimum wage for corporations grossing over $50 million a year is an excellent idea, excellent proposal. I support it, and I believe that our families deserve it. And of course, that will create more money that they can spend, and that will then generate more jobs.
Okay, so let's turn to your campaign now. Give us an idea about your plan to win.
So, you know, my plan to win is really based on the fundamentals of grassroots movement building, which is we're out there engaging with our neighbors every single day, knocking on doors and talking to them about the bread and butter issues that are affecting them. And the response has been tremendous. You know, we have over 24 volunteers knocking doors on a weekly basis. We have nearly 50 volunteers that have come out to knock doors for my campaign. And so we have the ability right now to speak to the voters, and we're going to speak to them early, and we're going to speak to them often.
Okay. Do you think in what ways is the incumbent, Ray Colon, vulnerable?
You know, Ray Colon is vulnerable in the sense that 50% of the ward doesn't know who he is. Nearly half of the precincts were not his in 2011, so they've never voted for him before. Oh. And then in the precincts that do know who he is...
So there was a redistricting.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And then in the districts that do know who he is, they don't like him. You know, I'm speaking to those voters, and he got just over 50% of the vote last time. So he's definitely vulnerable. Folks are ready for a change.
Do you want to mention who else is running in this?
You know, I've heard of a couple other folks, but I myself haven't come across any of them knocking doors. Yeah.
What is going to be your message to small businesses in the ward?
My message to small businesses is going to say you have a partner that wants to see you grow. You know, a lot of times folks say, oh, well, we need these big box corporations to come to the ward, or we need these big national retailers. And my sense is I want truly small businesses to thrive in our community, because those local dollars, right, circulate more. Every single dollar we spend in a mom and pop shop goes a much farther way towards helping our community than a dollar we spend in Walmart. So I'm going to be an ally to small businesses. I want them to know that they have a friend and an advocate that's going to say, let's work together so that you can thrive and grow. Great.
Have you got a campaign office and manager at this point?
So I'm actually currently in the process of hiring someone. I have a website, carlosrosa.org, that has my issues, my bio, information about the ward. And I'm also currently in the process of looking for a campaign office. Okay. But we're on track to have all those things in the next month or so.
How much money does it take, do you think, to win an election, aldermanic election?
So in 2011, Rahm Emanuel spent about $50 per vote. Gary Chico spent around $15, and Miguel Del Valle spent about $5. So that shows you the strength of running a grassroots campaign where you have the strength of people knocking on doors. So I'm not going to lie, it's going to take a lot of money. Ray Colon spent about $80,000 to retain, over $80,000 to retain his seat last time around. So I expect that it'll probably cost about the same to dethrone him. But at the same time, I know that we have an excited, motivated base of volunteers.
Great. And what about endorsements? What endorsements are you looking for?
So endorsements, I'm the candidate for working people. I'm going to be an advocate for working families. I come from a working family. The issues of this economic crisis are issues that my family are going through. And so I'm running for my family and for my neighbors that are underwater, right, and that are feeling the pinch of this economic crisis that we're in. And so I aspire to be the candidate of working people, right? So to get the CTU endorsement, to get AFSCME's endorsement, to get the endorsement of SEIU and other folks that want to be allies and partners in fighting for working people.
Okay. Now, the mayoral race, of course, is going to take most of the attention, and we've got, let's see, two candidates for sure, challenging Rahm and possibly Karen Lewis. How will these candidacies, will they have any effect on your campaign?
I think it's an exciting time to be a progressive in the city of Chicago, and I think we're seeing a surge of people that are coming out and saying we're ready for a change, we're ready to take back our city from the corporate elites. And so I'm very excited to see Karen Lewis in the race, potentially in the race, right? She hasn't announced yet. And I'm excited to see Bob Fioretti in the race. I think both of them would be excellent alternatives to our current mayor. And I also think that they're going to drive turnout, and turnout always helps challengers.
Okay, very good. Now, let's fast forward a little bit and say that you're in the city council. What are your priorities going to be when you get there?
So my priorities in the city council, number one, are stopping the corporate handouts, right? Fighting for TIF reform. Number two, closing the corporate tax loopholes, fighting for the LaSalle Street tax. And then number three, making sure that we are streamlining the services that we are providing. And so that means in my ward office, streamlining those services, and also at the same time, reforming the system to make sure that we're taking corruption out, right? So it's Professor Dick Simpson talks about the corruption tax in the city of Chicago, right? This notion of, our city services are suffering because of the corruption. And so it's going to be taking on that corruption tax and making sure that we are using our resources effectively.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask, I think I forgot about issues, is the city has played a role in healthcare. It had health clinics and mental health clinics, some of which have been closed, and maybe all of them will be closed, I don't know. What are your thoughts on the city's role in providing health care?
So I think that personally, I would like to see a single payer system. To address the systems, the issues that we have in terms of rising healthcare costs. The city's also looking at, rising costs in terms of providing healthcare to its workers. And I think a single payer system would help address that. But I think that, yes, the city has, in the status quo, the city has an immense opportunity to help people that are falling through the cracks. And so I think it was a mistake to close the mental health clinics. And I think it's a mistake to starve our public healthcare system of the resources that it needs. So I'm going to be an advocate to say, let's fully fund that system, and let's make sure that our public healthcare workers have the resources that they need to help our families.
Okay. Now, all of those positions are going to get you some pressure from the mayor, probably. So how are you going to deal with that pressure?
I'm running because I love this city, and I'm tired of the direction that we're going in, and I've seen how bad public policy has affected our families. And so, yes, it's definitely going to put a target on my back, but I'm not scared. Because this time it's not just about switching one politician for another, it's about building a movement for social and economic justice in the city of Chicago.
And how will that work out in your ward? What are you going to do to...
The message is resonating. I go to folks' doors and they tell me...
I mean, once you're elected, what are you going to do? Are you going to... What kind of a ward organization are you going to have?
I want a precinct-level ward organization. That's what we're building right now. Identifying precinct captains and leaders in every single precinct that will knock on their neighbors' doors and organize them and help me organize them so that we can understand our collective interests and advocate for that.
Who are some of the aldermen today that you admire, that you would like to work with?
So I think that, the members of the Progressive Caucus are definitely fighting the good fight in City Council.
You going to join them?
Absolutely, I would join the Progressive Caucus. And at the same time, I think that, the 22nd Ward Independent Precinct Organization that's been around for a very long time, right, that elected Chuy Garcia to the City Council, that elected Rick Munoz to the City Council, is a strong independent operation that is something that I would like to replicate and grow
That
upon.
kind of independence, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now when you're in the city council, will you align with the Democratic Party?
Which Democratic Party would be my question. You know, there's the Democratic Party of Elizabeth Warren, and then there's the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton and other neoliberals. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I remember my mother took me into the voting booth when I was 4 years old, and at the time they had straight ticket voting. And she told me quite frankly, she goes, okay, you know, you can go through and you can punch different numbers, or you can punch straight Republican, straight Democrat. And she said, today we're going to punch straight Democrat. And so she let me take it and punch straight Democrat. And I remember I asked her, I said, Mom, why did we punch straight Democrat? And she said, because we're not rich and we're brown. So, again, which is, I guess, is the best way you could explain something like that to a 4-year-old. So to me, you know, the Democratic Party of Lyndon Baines Johnson, of FDR, you know, that believed in a strong government that was uplifting people, that was giving a hand up, is the Democratic Party that I support. And if the Democratic Party returned to those ideals, then absolutely, I'm a Democrat 100%.
Carlos, what do you think is at stake in this election? Why would it matter to people outside your ward or even outside the city, whether or not you or Ray Colon is the alderman?
Chicago is a global city. Chicago is a working class city. And I think that Chicago, the movement that we're building here, has the opportunity to ignite a fire across this nation where people say progressives, unabashed progressives, can run and can win. And so the same thing that we saw with Will Guzzardi, right, where we had this young progressive take on the machine and win. I think if we continue to show examples of people stepping up and fighting the good fight, that will light a fire across the nation.
That's Will Guzzardi. He was elected a state rep running against Tony Barrios. Yes. Okay, so if people outside the district want to support your campaign, what should they do?
Dollars go a long way. One thing that we talk about is dollars and doors. And so if you can't come to City of Chicago and help me knock doors, then help me get some dollars so that I can send out mailers to reach the folks that we didn't get to talk to at the doors. So they can go to carlosrosa.org/donate.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is Bill Bianchi signing off for our Progressive Voices from the City.